Thank you all for joining us today. We're so happy to have you here this afternoon. We have a great presentation, and I'll turn it over to Cathleen Toomey, Vice President of Marketing for the Riverwoods Group.
Great. Thank you so much, Adele. I appreciate everyone coming in and checking in. And Kaylee, if you can advance the next slide. What I want to do is touch base on some housekeeping. Most everybody now knows how to react on Zoom. We have muted you all because we have over 100 people today, but we absolutely want your questions. Both Dr. Waldinger and I feel that this is going to be the most important part of our session. So please, at any point in time, put questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to as many as we possibly can during this workshop. We are also recording this, so if you love what you hear today and you want to send it to someone else or rewatch it in the future, we'll be sending you that webinar link in the near future. And we have only done this since March, so we are always open to how we can improve. So please send us suggestions for how we can improve and ideas for what else you'd like to hear about. We're hoping that you learn a lot today that you can use in your own life. And we can advance the slide. I am very, very excited to have Dr. Waldinger here to guide us through this conversation. I have been fascinated by this study for years and thrilled that he's made himself available for us to learn from. Dr. Waldinger is uniquely qualified to talk about how to have a long and happy life. You could say he's a triple Harvard. He went to Harvard College, Harvard Medical School, and is currently a clinical professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, as well as the director of the Harvard Study for Adult Development. He's also founder and director of the Lifespan Research Institute. Now, you may have heard of Dr. Waldinger through his TED Talk, in which he encapsulated the results of the study. It was, I think, one of the TED's 25 most popular talks ever. And he is most widely known for his work on the results of the world's most comprehensive longitudinal study. And we're going to get into why that is so significant. He's now beginning a study of the more than 2,000 children of the men, the second generation. And we are going to have a lot of questions for him today. As I mentioned, over 100 people zooming in. Most of our participants are what I like to call experienced adults and have time as retirees to really focus on what the results of this study mean and how it can affect them if they choose to. So we'll give you some really practical suggestions. Before I get into the meat of what we're going to be talking about, I just want to introduce who we are. And if Kaylee can go to the next slide. And the next slide, I'm Vice President of Marketing for Riverwoods Group. We are Northern New England's largest family of nonprofit continuing care retirement communities. That's a mouthful. What does that mean? If you can go to the next slide, Kaylee. We have 3 different communities in New Hampshire: Exeter, Manchester, and Durham, New Hampshire. Our communities are CCRCs, which is, and that's great, you can go to the next slide, which means you move into a community like ours as an independent adult, and you have freedom to not worry about home maintenance, not worry about security, transportation. You have the access to more friends, more options, and importantly, if you move to a CCRC, you stay in control of the choices in your life. Now, what do I mean by that? It means that you come in as an independent adult, but as you age, if you have needs, assisted living, memory care, or skilled nursing or nursing care, you can get those needs right within the community. And it's going to be less expensive, and you know the people who are caring for you. So it's particularly valuable for a couple, people age differently. You can stay together. One person isn't driving to visit another person. It's also considered an insurance product. So not only are we nonprofit, but we're also an insurance product. So your costs are much lower than if you were to live at home, wait, and then go straight to assisted living, nursing care, because you're going to be paying much more. So if you'd like to learn more about our communities, we have contacts at the end, which we will share with you. And our goal in this kind of a web workshop is to provide information to people that just elevates the knowledge of how adults can live their best lives as they get older. And I've been with this organization for 13 years, and this is one of the most fascinating studies I've read about. So I want to just welcome again, Dr. Waldinger. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So we have so much to learn from you today, but what I'd like to start with is having you tell us about the Grant and the Gluck study. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. What started the idea to have such a massive study?
Well, initially, they were two separate studies that actually didn't know about each other. One study started at the Harvard Student Health Service, the health service that gave healthcare to Harvard undergraduates in 1938. They were interested in studying mental and physical health. They said, there's been so much emphasis on what goes wrong with us as human beings. Let's study all the things that go right. So they thought they would study a group of Harvard College undergraduates for a few years to see how they moved through college and into young adult life. Now, of course, back in 1938, they thought, well, if you want to study normal young adult development, you study all white men who go to Harvard.
Representative population.
Exactly. Like we would never do that now. Never, ever. And of course, we've now brought in women into our study, both in the first generation, but in the second generation, more than half women. And so we are changing that. But initially, it was a study of these Harvard undergraduate men. And the second study was started just nearby at Harvard Law School. It was started by a law professor, Sheldon Gluck, and his wife, Eleanor Gluck, who was a social worker. The two of them were interested in why some children from really disadvantaged backgrounds managed to stay out of trouble and grow up into upstanding citizens. So if you had like 2 strikes against you already, how could you stay out of trouble with the law and trouble at school? So they gathered all these boys from some of the poorest and most troubled families in the city of Boston in 1938. Almost all immigrants, again, all Caucasian, because the city of Boston was 97% white in 1938. So these were the 2 studies. They didn't expect either of them to last more than 5 to 10 years. And then my predecessor, the third director of the study, brought the 2 studies together and said, let's study these 2 extremes of the social ladder. Let's study them together. And so that's how it started.
Oh, that made so much sense. To combine the 2 makes it more powerful. What I'm interested in that I haven't been able to figure out is when did the previous director, because obviously you haven't been there for 83 years, when did they decide the results were done? When did they publish the study? At what general age?
Well, this is a study that's never done.
Yeah.
So we have
still going on.
There have been hundreds of papers, more than 10 books published about the study in academic, papers in academic journals. We're still collecting data. And the interesting thing is that in most studies, they They do a study, you collect the data, you publish the data, and that's it. In our study, we're still going back to the pieces of paper from 1938 to look at the information we have and using that information now to talk about what happens to people across the whole adult lifespan. So we are still publishing information that we gathered 82 years ago.
Wow, that's incredible. And you said there have been a number of books and articles in your TED Talk. How widely distributed have the results of this study been, in your opinion?
Well, I gave the TED Talk because most of what we wrote, all those journal articles, were published in academic journals, very respected, but they're journals that nobody reads, right? So,
Right.
so we had learned so much about adult life and about what happens to people as they go through lives. And it was hidden in these very fancy journals. So someone said to me, why don't you give a TED Talk? So I did that. And that's one of the things that started letting people know, letting the world know more about this treasure trove of information about lives that it'll never be repeated. This is such an accident that this study was able to continue for 82 years.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely incredible. I think two things were incredible about the study. One is just the longevity of it. You know, it did encompass only white men, but it did encompass white men of two different socioeconomic groups, and how long it went. And what I found fascinating is it's so positive for us who are living now, because to me, it said it's not self-determined. It's not just your genes to determine if you're going to live a long and happy life. And that happiness is such a hard thing to quantify. But if you could share with the audience what the results of the study were. I love it because I quote it all the time, but I would love to hear from you the results of the study.
Yeah. Well, there are many, many results. That's why we published, a couple hundred papers, but there are a couple of very big results. The first one will not be a surprise to you or to our viewers today, which is that taking care of yourself physically is really important to live longer, and also to make you feel better while you're living longer. So what does that mean? It means eating right. It means not being overweight if you can possibly help it. It means getting regular exercise to keep not only your body healthier, but your brain healthier. It means not abusing alcohol. It means, if you can, not smoking, not using tobacco, because all of those things have been shown to shorten people's lifespan, and also just to make their lives more unpleasant while they are living. So this is kind of like your grandmother's advice, like take care of yourself. Like there's a quote I really like. One octogenarian looking back on her life said, take care of your body as though you're going to need it for 100 years.
That's great.
Turns out that's true.
I love that. Because if you take care of your body as if it's going to last 100 years, you may last 100 years.
Exactly. Yeah. So then the second big finding, and I think that's the one you want me to talk a little more about, is a finding that we at first didn't believe. So we were trying to see what predicted who was going to be happy, but also who was going to stay healthy longer as they grew older in our study. So we looked back, once people got into their 80s, and some even into their 90s, we looked back at all the information we'd collected to see, well, what did we know about them when they were younger, about their habits and their lives, that predicted who was going to grow old happily and healthfully and who wasn't. And the biggest predictor we found was that the people who were more connected to other people, the people who had more relationships, better relationships with others, were the people who were the happiest and the healthiest and lived the longest. And at first, we didn't believe it. We thought, well, it's all very nice. Relationships make you happy, but how could they actually make you healthier? And it turned out that other studies were finding the same thing. So no single research study, as I bet many of your listeners know, no one research study tells the absolute truth. It's just impossible. So what you want to get is many studies to come to the same conclusion. And if that happens, many studies of different people, then you can begin to trust the conclusions. And many studies now, find the same thing, that the better our relationships are with each other, the healthier we stay. So can I say a little more, or do you want me to stop?
No, please do. Right. Please do.
So then the question is, well, how does that work? Like how could the quality of my relationship with my friends or with my spouse, how could that actually get into my body and make it less likely that I'd get type 2 diabetes or less likely that I'd get heart disease? How could that possibly happen? So we've been studying that for the last about 10 years with the children of all our original study subjects. The children are all baby boomers. They're mostly in their 50s and 60s. And we've been studying the mechanisms, the ways that a good, warm relationship actually changes your body chemistry and your body functioning to strengthen your body to prevent some of these preventable diseases that we get when we get older.
So I'd love to dig into that a little bit more, as I'm sure people have a lot of questions. When you say warm relationships and relationships with your spouse, does that mean the person that has the most friends on Facebook is going to win the day? How do you define a life-affirming relationship, I guess I would say?
Yes.
How do you define that?
That's such a good question. It's so important. And as you can guess, it's not the number of friends you have on Facebook that seems to relate to this.
Kind of set you up for that one.
Yeah, you did. That was a good question. But it does relate to the quality of your relationship. So really, what we've learned is that relationships actually calm us down. They energize us. They make us feel warmer. They make us feel happier when relationships are going well. So that includes maybe your relationship with your spouse, maybe your relationship with your adult child, with your grandchild. It might include your relationship with your old friend from elementary school who you stay in touch with on Facebook. That could be it. So it really depends on whether the relationships actually warm us and calm us down. And the way to check that out, if you think about it, is you probably know the experience of being upset about something. Like something happens, you're all worried, you're all upset, and you go and talk to someone. You talk to a friend, you talk to a relative, and you can literally feel your body calm down as you talk about it, especially if somebody is a good listener and a sympathetic listener. And so it's that feeling of soothing, of calming the body down that we think really works its magic for us. That's how relationships, that's a big way that relationships work. So you can get that. You can get that from talking to the checkout person in the grocery store line. But you get it more often from talking to someone you're close to. But in other words, I think what I'm saying is that the warmth of relationships can come from many different places. I've gotten to be friends with the mail carrier who delivers my mail now because I sit it on my front porch because I'm not going anywhere.
It's a big event of the day.
It's a big event of the day when he comes. And I say hi to him. And we kind of have this little friendship now. And actually, I feel better.
Oh, that's great.
When I see him.
That is fantastic. I love that example.
Yeah.
That is so, because that also, one thing when you look at the study and you delve into it, it makes you realize one of the things I would have expected from the study is married people are happier, single people are less happy, but it's not necessarily whether or not you have a spousal attachment, it's the depth of friendships in your life.
Exactly. And that's important because, some people have asked me, well, if I don't have a spouse, is it over for me? Like, am I out of luck? Well, no, absolutely not. And I think that one of the things that is important is that all of our relationships can be nurtured. So what it means is that every relationship needs attention in order to keep it vibrant and alive. And so one of the things we can all do, whether we live alone or with others, whether we have a few relationships or a lot of them, is we can make choices every day to invest in those relationships. Like we can call people, we can text people, we can set up video chats, even during this time of social distancing, and that making the effort to reach out can really help what I sometimes call social fitness. It's almost like exercising. Like you don't exercise today and then say, okay, I'm done. I've done my exercise for the rest of my life. And similarly with your relationships, including with your nearest and dearest, you're not done. It's that each day you want to think about, okay, who have I not talked to in a while? Or how could I reach out to that person who might be a little more alone than they want to be? And that's the kind of way that we can keep our relationships going no matter who we are.
That leads into another question that I had. But before I get to that, I want to just ask about vulnerability. So when you describe the nature of the friendship that you have, it seems that the ones that feed you, keep you warm, are ones where you have the ability to be vulnerable with a friend and feel safe.
Yes.
Would that be another way to describe it? So you can talk about your worst day?
Yes.
Okay.
My predecessors used to ask a question of our study participants. They would ask, who could you call in the middle of the night if you were sick or scared?
Oh, wow.
List everybody. And some people couldn't list anybody, including the person they lived with. And some people could list several people. And so I think it speaks to your point that you want to have at least somebody on this earth who you can talk to about personal matters, who you can be vulnerable with, who you can be yourself with. And it doesn't have to be any particular person in any particular role, but just somebody. And that means, too, that you could be a shy person. You could be an introvert. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing unhealthy about that. But if you have one or two people who you can really confide in and be yourself with and feel close to, that's all you need.
That's really important to know, because I think there are people that shy away from, oh no, I need to create all kinds of friendships. One thing that I think is distinctive about older adults is that unfortunately many of the friends that we've cultivated over the years are lost to death, or they move away. What would your recommendation be to folks like that, who want to be in a friend relationship, but their best friends have passed away?
Yes. And my closest friend passed away a year and a half ago, and it was such a loss. And I really understand more about how we, as we get older, we begin to lose people. And so then the question is, can you bring new people into your life? And I think that's where our study shows that, yes, people make new friends in their 90s. People get married in their 80s and 90s. It happens. So that the possibilities are there. I think that especially when we're facing loss and we're grieving for the people we've lost, it can be easy to feel like there's no future. But one of the things our study of all these lives tells us is that it's always possible still to bring new people in or to rekindle an old friendship. So one of the things that's great about this new era of Facebook and other platforms is that friends you haven't been in touch with in decades can come back together. Like I know of people who have gotten together, groups of elementary school friends. So groups of people they knew 70 years ago and 80 years ago, some of them. And they get these groups together and they hang out together online and they share stories and they share pictures of their grandchildren. And so I would urge our viewers to think, okay, is there anything I might explore about rekindling old friendships? Just even to find a name of somebody you realize that's the person you used to know, and just send them a little message and see if something comes back.
I really, really agree with that. And I think that sometimes you need to be the one that initiates it because, we know there's an epidemic of loneliness among older adults. And I think sometimes it's just putting that first feeler out. If it's just looking on Facebook and saying, are you the guy that went to St. James School or, Newton Elementary and see if that's there. I think then the response is very rich. Yeah. And I think that's why we love the idea of a CCRC, because it can be harder as you get older. Maybe you're not driving at night. Maybe your friends have passed away. When you move into a community that's full of people who have free time, who are looking to make connections, we see these new friendships, new best friends at 82. There's, we have had 6 weddings so far at Riverwoods, Exeter, 1 at Birch Hill. So people meet, they fall in love, they become best friends. And it's so invigorating to see that, and you put yourself in that position where you have more access to people, you reap the rewards as long as you're open to it.
Yes. And I think that what's important is to know that this kind of possibility is out there, because it is so easy to believe that the future is over for you, right? That you get older, you lose people, and that is simply not the case. When we look at people's lives, it is the case that just what you're saying happens, that new friendships happen, marriages happen, new choruses form, all kinds of things happen.
Ukulele bands,
Absolutely.
It's not over if you're
not over.
If you put that energy out there.
It's not over. The other thing that's important is that even, because one of the problems as we get older is that our physical health can keep us from going out and about in the same ways.
Right.
And so one of the things that's also important to know is that many, many other people are in the same situation. And now particularly where we can connect on video chats and in these other ways, it's really possible to connect with groups of people, to connect with individual people, even when your health may restrict you to staying closer to home, to staying in one place.
That is a wonderful point. And I wanted to ask you to kind of parse the different permutations of social media, and give us a sense of what's healthy and can engender that warm feeling, and what is not healthy, because there's certainly a lot of studies out that talk about how damaging social media can be, in terms of fear of missing out, FOMO, and comparing yourself to others. So can you just give us your thoughts on healthy versus not healthy social media, if there is such a thing?
Well, you're asking the question that everybody is asking now. It's so important, and we don't We don't have the answers yet. So we're doing more research on this. And we're actually going to be studying our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And part of what we're going to be studying is the digital revolution and how different kinds of people encounter the internet, right? Mm-hmm. And what works for whom. So we think that it's a combination, that it's not just, one, like Facebook is bad and YouTube is good, or not at all. We know that's not the case. It's probably the case that who we are as individuals makes us react in certain ways to social media platforms. And that when we know more about that, we can decide, okay, who's more vulnerable to feeling worse and who's not? Who's okay to use all the social media they want? But in the meantime, what I would say for people who are tuned in is check in with yourself. If you check in with yourself after you've been online, let's say you've been on a social media platform and you've been on for a little while and then you sign off, check in with yourself. Do I feel better or worse than when I started? Do I feel more energized and more optimistic, or do I feel a little sadder, a little more down? Okay? Because what you'll see then is what effect is my engagement with the internet having on me? And if it's having that effect that lowers your mood and lowers your energy, then it's worth figuring out a different way to interact with the internet.
That's a great gut check. That's a great way of...
Because we can't say for each person we can't, one size doesn't fit all, but each of us can check in for ourselves.
One of the questions that I have is, what practical advice can you give all of the people who are in the audience today and who soon will be taking questions from, knowing what we know now based on this study, that having warm friendships can actually not only make you happier, but help you live healthier? What can we do now to change, to gain more of that in our lives?
Yeah. Well, one thing is to pay attention to the choices you're making. So you probably are making choices all day long. Do I do this thing that keeps me by myself? Or do I do this thing that connects me with someone else? And see if you can make more choices that connect you with other people. So if the thought is, do I call my sister who I haven't talked to in a while? Or do I watch this news program? Call your sister.
Definitely don't watch the news.
Don't watch the news. And that's the other thing. So the other thing I would say is to be very careful about how you take in the news and how you take in. So this is an era of so much social division and so much acrimony, when actually we have so much more in common with every other human being than we have differences. We have so much more. But that our political life and our media make a lot of the differences because they want to keep us upset and they want to keep us riveted and watching.
Right.
So be really careful. One of my meditation teachers had a great quote that I like about this. She said, "Your mind is like tofu. It tastes like whatever you marinate it in." So
that's perfect.
Don't marinate your mind in nasty, upsetting news. Keep abreast of the news because we do need to know what's happening in our world, but spend more time connecting with people, spend more time on the things that bring us closer to each other, not the things that divide us.
That is wonderful advice. Wonderful advice. And when you think back to ages ago, we only needed an hour of evening news.
Yeah.
You don't need 24 hours of news. And I think as older adults, the tendency is, if you're not out and about in the world as much, you consume it through your TV, and your TV becomes your entertainment. And so instead of picking up the phone and finding your childhood friend, you just watch another episode of news on
Yeah.
whatever channel you prefer.
And you know what we've been doing? So let's say sometimes you need TV, right? You need to relax. You need to just chill out, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've been watching nature shows.
Oh,
like remind yourself of the natural world. Remind yourself of the world that's way bigger than our petty political squabbles. And so you can watch TV without agitating yourself as well, depending on what you put into your mind.
mm-hmm. That's a great idea. Last question before we go to the Q&A is COVID, obviously, dominating the world. We are all anticipating a second wave in the fall and winter. In New England, we're dreading fall and winter because it's going to be hard to do things outside. So through the summer, instead of staying in and binging Netflix, you can go for a walk with a friend. How do you think people should mentally prepare themselves for winter and COVID, and with the results of this survey in mind?
Yes, yes. Well, and I'm trying to prepare myself for just the reason you're talking about. I mean, I have so loved being able to be outside and to take walks with people. So first of all, let me go back to my meditation training, which teaches me that no, we can't prepare for an entire winter. Impossible mentally to prepare for that. We can only
Really?
take one day at a time, right?
Okay.
That if I start thinking about, oh, and January is going to be like this, and then, oh my gosh, February is going to be worse, I will go down a rabbit hole that has no use to me at all. So what you know is that all we have to do is meet each day as it comes. So, we know that there are some things we'll do as the weather gets colder. We'll dress warmer and we'll still go outside. And when there's ice on the ground, some days we won't go out. Some days we'll be more careful and we'll wear special shoes. And okay, there are a lot of things we'll do, but none of us can prepare for the whole winter in one block without just falling into despair. So let's not do that. Let's say I'm going to meet one day at a time and I'm going to be creative the way we've been creative so far. I mean, think about the things you and I are doing right now and all of our viewers are doing that we didn't think we were going to be doing 8 months ago, right?
Right.
We've adapted.
Oh, we have so adapted.
We've pivoted and we will do it again. So we're going to spend our first winter doing social distancing and we'll figure it out. And I think that that's the thing we need to remind ourselves of because, otherwise we're borrowing trouble before it's happened.
I think that's a great mantra, and it makes me realize I forgot in the introduction to also mention that you are a Zen priest.
Yeah.
But you just demonstrated your Zenliness. That's a good. I think so much of us borrow trouble. We look ahead. We think the election. We think all the negative political ads, and then winter, mud, snow and ice. So it's good to just think about taking it one day at a time. It is 1:45, so I'm going to go to the questions, but I have one really last question. Of all of the interviews and all of the conversations that you've had about this research project, is there something that no one has asked you yet about the study that you'd like to share? Something that doesn't usually come up that you think is particularly illuminating? And you can think about that while I go to the Q&A section because...
Well, I will say one thing. It's been asked, but I'd love to put it out there for the people who have joined us, if that's okay. So it's not that it's never been asked, but I think it's worth putting out there that, sometimes when we talk about happiness, we can get the impression, from people like me opining about happiness, that if you just do the right things, you can be happy all the time. And I just want to put out there that that's not true, that nobody's happy all the time, that isn't the way human life works. And it's okay. And the reason I put that out there is that sometimes when you're not happy, you can feel like, well, it's my fault because I'm just not doing the right things. And if I were doing the right things, I'd be happy. That's not true. We have better days and we have worse days. And happiness comes and goes. And so what we're really talking about is trying to build a kind of bedrock of well-being so that even on the down days, even on the worst days, we still have some people we can go talk to. We still have some things that make us a little bit happier. So my message is not to worry that we're not happy all the time, that's not the expectation. It's really just to build as solid a base of well-being as we can.
That is very astute, and the Buddha would approve.
Yeah, I think you would.
Okay, I'm going to go to some questions. So if you haven't typed your question in, please do. The first question is, diet, exercise, and relationships bring us here, but what actually do we octogenarians need to live out a happy and thankful life and a purposeful last decade? So I think purposeful is an interesting word there.
Yes. And I love that. I did all these things, diet, exercise, relationships, so I got here. But now what, right? And I think you're right. I think purposeful is really important. That's the operative thing. Like what we all need to do at every phase of life is find, okay, what's making me get up in the morning each day? And if I don't have anything right now that's getting me up in the morning, what could I find? So what are some things that I feel have meaning?
Yes.
One of the questions I like that sometimes gets asked by Zen teachers is, what do you want to have live in the world because you're here?
Oh.
And I think that's something that each of us could think about each day. So yes, so let's say now I'm in my 80s or I'm in my 90s and I can't do many things that I used to be able to do, but what do I care about? And what would I like to put out there in the world or support in the world? Because I care about it, because it means something to me. And I think that's one of the things that as an octogenarian, you have the opportunity to keep inquiring about.
And I think what's also interesting is when you talked about what do you want to live in the world? So you are directing your attention to something bigger than yourself. And I think the more we look outward and say, what can we contribute as an octogenarian versus how much we are focusing on ourselves, that makes for a healthy connection.
Yeah. So for example,
go ahead.
We went back and asked our study participants, how did you get through really hard times in your life? So one of the things that people have as they get older is a storehouse of wisdom, because we've been through more experiences than younger people. And if you have the capacity to share those experiences, to share some of the things you'd wish you'd known when you were younger, or some of those factors of what got you through hard times in your life, those would be so helpful.
Mm-hmm. I think that's exactly right. More questions. This one, was social connection the main difference in successful aging that you found in the initial group? So
Good question.
Social connection the main difference?
We can't say that it was the main difference. We can say that it was one of just 2 or 3 of the most important things. So the other biggest one, as I said, was self-care, care for your body. So what we're not able to do very well is actually compare. So are relationships more important than exercise? Like that, some people have tried to do that, but rigorous scientific comparison is almost impossible to do.
But the good news is it's one of the things that we can control.
Absolutely.
So I find great relief in that we have the ability to control and shape how we age. Another question, as an introvert, I tend to spend more time alone, but I cherish and cultivate my lifelong friends. How can I open myself up to new friendships? So as an
Yeah,
introvert, how can I open myself up to new
right.
friendships?
Yeah, that's a really important question. So one of the things that people find is that if you're engaged in an activity that you care about alongside other people, that you're more likely to casually make friends. So if you're an introvert, you're not likely to go up to a stranger at a big cocktail party and start talking. That's just not who you are, right? And that's not who many of us are. But for you, maybe it's getting involved in a bridge group, or maybe for you, it's getting involved in writing letters for somebody's campaign for city council, or and that what will happen is that if you can be alongside, it's harder now, but if you can be maybe on a small Zoom call with other people who are planning to work for a cause that you care about, you will gradually come to know those people better, and some of them might become friends. So what I would say is focus on those things you care about, those things you love, and do them with other people in small groups, and see if that helps you to make new relationships.
Good. So following your heart and what you're truly interested in, and then meshing people there. We have a couple of questions on the second stage of the study. One question is, are there many people of color in the second stage of the study? And then a related question is, have your study findings changed in any way as you've added women and other ethnicities into your study? And I don't know if your study is even far enough along to answer that, but those are the two questions.
They're great questions. We have no ethnic diversity. It is terrible. Everybody's white. And
even in the second stage?
Even in the second generation, because we were only studying the children. And so, all of the Caucasian men married Caucasian women as it happened. Mm-hmm. In the first generation, they all had Caucasian children. But now there's more diversity coming in with spouses of the second generation. And now we're pretty sure that the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren will have more ethnic diversity. In addition, we are thinking about possibly expanding to a new sample of another ethnic group. We're not sure we can do that. It's complicated because obviously when we bring in a new sample, we don't have the data on their ancestors, on their parents and grandparents.
Right.
So we have to figure out how we would do that. But bringing in women has been a huge help because we find differences as well as similarities, that there are gender differences in friendship patterns, in marriage patterns. And then there are some big things that aren't different between men and women. And so we are always, and when I present findings, like even the findings I presented today about relationships being so powerful, I would not present those if they were only based on our study of all white men. I'm presenting those because those findings were confirmed by studies that included women and people of color and people of other countries.
Okay, that makes sense. So you don't find that, or is there a one or two findings related to women that would change what you're saying now when you include women, or is did this bear out between women and men? Is there a differentiation between what your findings are with the study you presented versus adding women in?
Yeah. Well, one of the things we're finding, no surprise, is that women are more accustomed to nurturing relationships than men are.
Mm.
So, one of the things we are very interested in is friendship patterns that are different for women than for men. And one of the things we see is that men's friendships will often tend to die away as they get into family life and
Mm-hmm.
middle age, and that women are better at maintaining those friendships. And so, what we want to look at now is what are the implications of that for their health? And we're also looking at how can we help men pay more attention to maintaining relationships as
Right.
they get on in their lives.
Yeah, and I think this study to me is particularly poignant for men who I have read other research studies that say, after 30, 35, men have a very hard time making friends that are not connected to the married couple. So
Yes,
the work here may be harder for men, but no less important.
absolutely.
I have an interesting question. I don't know if you can answer this. How does one reconcile relationships with family and friends who are among themselves not very friendly? So, how do you reconcile relationships with family and friends who are not friendly?
Hmm. Well, if some family and friends are not friendly, there's a limit to what you can do on your side.
Mhm.
But we can try to be more active. If some people don't reach out, and so they feel unfriendly, but they are happy to be reached out to. Other people are just cranky and no fun when you do reach out, and so that can be harder. And I think one of the things we have to judge is when are relationships worth investing in, and when are they worth kind of keeping more distance from? Because really acrimonious relationships, high conflict relationships, take a toll on our health. Um, so I think it's a judgment call. But I think that when possible, it's really helpful not to maintain family feuds. If you can bury the hatchet, if you can uh, build bridges, uh, it's better than not, because family feuds take an awful lot of energy on everybody's part just to maintain the wall. Um, so the bottom line is do what you can with the relationships that where there's possibility, and let some of the others kind of dwindle.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think going back to your original conversation about what are the friendships that feed you, it's where you feel warm, and you feel energized. I think we've all had experiences with, frenemies or people that suck energy from us, and you can't sustain those kinds of relationships.
That's right. But I think the other thing to note is that it's important not to fuel conflict. So if you find that with certain people, you're just always getting into arguments and you're always revving up, find ways not to do that, because that takes a toll on you, not just on the other person. So just find, if someone is really agitating you, find ways to step away from that.
Okay, we have a lot of questions. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Um, and I hate to end this because there are more questions coming in. Um, but I guess one last question I'll take. If you were married but now single, how do you avoid being the fifth wheel in your previous relationships? That's
Oh,
we'll end
that
with
is really hard. That is
yeah.
really hard. We have a couple of friends who are now single, who were married, and they're finding that they don't get invited to the couples dinners that they used to get invited to, and that kind of thing. And it's hurtful. It's painful.
Mhm.
Um, and sometimes because people don't know, it's not to excuse it at all. It's just sometimes people don't know what to do, don't know whether to invite. But what I would say is that if you can continue to reach out to the people you most care about, That's important. If there are relationships that you just say, I really don't want to lose that relationship, be the active one to reach out. And then, of course, the other thing is to see about new friendships with people who are single, because there are a lot of single people and they too are looking for new communities. This happens in our lives. So I'll give you another example. Sometimes young couples will find that most of their friends have had children and they have decided not to have children, or they haven't been able to have children, but for whatever reason, they're a couple without children and all their friends have children, and they're finding they don't get invited because they don't. So we wish these transitions didn't happen in this way, but they do. And so what we try to do then is adapt to them. And part of that for the newly single person is to hold on to the most valuable relationships if you can, but also to make new relationships with other people who are in the same life situation that you are.
That's good advice. And it goes back to what we started out with, which is make social connections a priority in your life. Make having taken care of yourself and your body, and also invest in relationships that are those positive connections that are going to make you have that warmth and that feeling, and actively work on that. Would that be a good summary?
That's a great summary.
I tell you, it's been fantastic. It's been a personal thrill to have this much time to connect with you. I appreciate everyone in the audience. I'm sorry we haven't been able to get to all of your questions, but if you continue to post, we'll see what kinds of answers we can get back to you. And we will, again, be recording this presentation, so you'll get this and be able to listen to Dr. Waldinger again and share his wisdom with others that may not have seen this. I want to expand this message to as many people as we possibly can, because I think it's such a good life-affirming message that no matter where you are in your life, you can start now to do things that will help you live a happier and healthier life for the rest of your days. So that's a wonderful message, especially in this time of conflict and COVID. And I appreciate Dr. Waldinger being with us here today.
It was a pleasure.
Oh, thank you. I do want to mention that if you liked this, we have a really important workshop on memory with Dr. Maureen O'Connor, who's from BU's Alzheimer's Disease Center Education. She's a director of neuropsychology. She's going to talk about what is normal memory loss and what is something more significant, and what can you do now to strengthen your memory for the days ahead. So many of us are worried about the diseases of Alzheimer's and dementia we've heard so much about. Here's a very factual session that can give you some practical tips, and you can sign up for that in the next slide at any of our 3 websites, either Riverwoods Exeter, Birch Hill, which is in Manchester, New Hampshire, or Riverwoods Durham. So thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much, Dr. Waldinger, and hope to see you again on Zoom. Thanks again, and have a happy and healthy life.